We are CalECSE, the California Early Childhood Special Education Network. We're funded by the California Department of Education, and our focus is to support you all out in the field and connect you all together and bring out the best practices for all of us so that we can improve programs for our earliest learners. So welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks for taking your lunch. I hope you brought something good to eat and you could munch along. And we just really appreciate you being here. I'd like to introduce Carrie Rodriguez. She is our program specialist for CalECSE, along with myself as program specialist, and Sarah Castillo, but she's also our presenter today, along with Lindsay Sandru. They both have really excellent experience and knowledge to share with you, and I'm so happy to turn it over to Carrie and Lindsay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, welcome. We are super excited to talk about play-based assessments. Lindsay and I are big fans of play, and how could you work in preschool and not love play? So quick introduction. I've been a school psychologist working in preschool for 16 years. I'm a licensed educational psychologist, and I'm really just thrilled to talk about this topic today. Lindsay, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Lindsay Sandru. I am a school-based speech and language pathologist. I work in Piedmont Unified, which is a small district in the Bay Area. And I've been doing this for about 11 years, focused with a big focus on preschool. So I'm excited to talk about the little ones today.
So today we're going to cover, first of all, why is play so important in early childhood? And then we're going to talk about why it's a good idea to use play-based assessments with the age range of 2 to 5. And we're going to talk about the different types of play-based assessments, observational. We're going to really focus on non-standardized, informal play-based assessments. We're going to do like one slide on semi-standardized and standardized play-based assessments. We're going to teach you how to make your own play kit, know what to look for, because that's the most important thing when you're doing play-based assessment, some tips and tricks, how to collect data, and how to incorporate your findings into reports. So first, I just want you to read this quote and then maybe drop a little bit in the chat, like what this quote makes you think of, or what is it a new idea to you? And if there's any comments in the chat, Liberty or Sarah, that you want to read out. Did anybody respond or surprised by this?
Folks are saying it's as important as sleeping and eating, and they love it. It's so true.
It's so true. I love it.
Not surprised. And
yes. Okay, good. Well, then you're my preschool people. You're here for the right reason. So decades of research provide significant evidence about the benefits of play for children's learning and development. And it's really true. Children are really driven to play. It's a biological urge because it's how they learn. It's how they develop language. It's how they develop their cognitive skills. It is a biological urge. So I'm going to show a short video from the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists that outlines the importance of play. And most of these children, I am assuming, are neurotypically developing. So I want you to look at it just for the idea of how important play is for development, but also as an observational tool. I want you to think about, like, all these kids are just samples of neurotypical development, most of them, I'm assuming. And think about like all the gestures you're seeing, all the nonverbal communication you're seeing. And these children range from infants all the way up to probably elementary. And I want you to look at the pretend play, how they're showing each other objects, the social smiles, the shared enjoyment that you're seeing, the laughter, the sharing of toys, the seeking out of each other, the parallel play that you're seeing, and the cooperative play. So I want you to use this 5 minutes to really have a chance to look at kind of what neurotypical play looks like, because that's really important to know as we go into doing assessments.
Play is the name we give to children's inborn wish to explore their world.
It's what children do when they are choosing, they're actively engaged, and they're doing what they're doing for their own reasons and in their own way.
It's something that's innate in children. They have a need and desire to play.
They're kind of exploring uncertainty. They're taking themselves beyond what they know and understand and into what they're curious about and want to find out about. You know, one of the ways that children learn all sorts of things is through making mistakes. And if children never make mistakes, they don't get that feedback. They don't have that experience that they can build on. In essence, I think children need space and time throughout their lives when they can play, and they need adults around them who have an understanding about the value and kind of what's lying behind their play.
It's how they learn, it's how they develop new ideas, new skills, and they use them in this safe environment.
So what play is from the very earliest stages is that real life interaction, and it happens naturally. There is a drive to learn in every tiny baby, and what we've got to do is nurture that drive rather than shut it down.
We know that there's lots of different types of play which are very important for children's development. You know, you have the active play, and that develops all their gross motor, all the big movements, so the running, the climbing, negotiating space and obstacles. They have exploratory play that develops their fine motor skills and their sensory integration, develops their eye-hand coordination, the ability to be able to finish a puzzle and hold a pencil for writing. The basic play skill that children need for language is called representational play and then imaginative pretend play. This is when babies, 1-year-olds, will be holding up an empty cup to pretend to take a drink, or they'll hold something up to their ear and pretend to talk. And you usually find that this play coincides with the emergence of first words. There's a very strong link between play and language.
So for example, turn taking in play, so rolling the ball, dad rolls the ball, baby rolls the ball, dad rolls the ball, baby rolls the ball. My turn, your turn, putting shapes in a shape sorter, my turn, your turn. All that turn taking will eventually turn into taking turns in conversation.
Children need to develop very good play skills in order to develop good imagination, to develop good language, to then be able to use this language in their speaking, but also in their writing as well.
Children's social development, learning to get along with the other kids, learning how to make up if anything goes wrong, choosing what they want to do, finding out whether it works, learning to deal with triumph and disaster. Almost everything that we become as human beings has got its roots in play.
Children like to test themselves. They like to, take risks, to seek out physical challenges. That's a valuable learning process.
The big thing is to make sure that children get lots of opportunities to play out with other children using their imagination. If that doesn't happen, you may very well have repercussions later in terms of that they will cease to have the will to explore and the will to learn.
The basic role of play is equipping children for what life might throw at them.
And what adults can add to that is the things that human brains crave in the early years. Songs, music, stories, lots of them.
Two big eyes! What is it? A bear!
If those happen, your chances of the child growing up to be bright, balanced and a responsible and productive citizen are much, much greater.
Okay, thank you so much for watching that. I love that video. So just take a second to drop in the chat a takeaway from the video of, what I was talking about when you were observing the kind of neurotypical play development that is mostly seen in that video, or a thought about why play-based assessment should be included in early childhood evaluations. So if you can just go drop some thoughts in the chat, and we're going to take a quick review. I see some good stuff coming into the chat. Let's see. I want to see what we get.
in here. I want to call out one of the comments in the chat from Ermelita. I'm trying to find it. Important to note how autistic play may display differently, and that's okay. And we are going to talk about that as well today. But it's still, it's that coming back to that idea of it's a drive. There's a drive for it, and it's a drive comes from a drive to learn and explore.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So, Lindsay, these are your slides.
These are my slides, yeah. So what is play? And they define it in that video, but there's a handful of definitions out there, but there's a few things we can call out. That play should be enjoyable. It requires active engagement in which the child is absorbed. So it's that seeing that playful state of mind where they're very active, very engaged, but they're also relaxed because there's no judgment. It's just they're doing what they want to do. Play is intrinsically motivated and driven by the child. It's flexible and changing, though the child may have their own structure, their own rules that's governing their play, but at the same time it can change. It can be flexible, and play is often imaginative. It's creative. And it can be non-literal. It's not always, but oftentimes, especially in the more complex stages, it's non-literal and symbolic. Let me change the slide. So there are a couple frameworks that people use to describe the developmental stages of play. This one you'll come across more often. It's the 6 stages of play, but it's really describing how a child relates to others when they're playing. So using this framework is really helpful if you're doing like a classroom observation. You can see where the child may be in terms of how they interact with others. So it's not just do they play with others or do they not, but there's different stages. So they might be at 2 years old, for example, they're engaging more in spectator or onlooker behavior. So they might be watching others play, but they're learning from that, right? And then parallel play, kids might be playing just next to each other. Associative play is where they're playing with the same thing, but they might talk to each other or they might check out what the other person's doing and maybe imitate for a second. And then there's cooperative play where they're building together. That's when, you see the kids building a big, stormtrooper base together with magnetiles. So that's cooperative play. And, it goes from 0 to 4+ years, and kids can display, sometimes parallel play, sometimes associative play if they're moving through these stages.
We're going to show a really quick video. So that video is important because as you assess, and especially when you're doing observations and writing goals, you can look at where the child you're assessing is at in their stages of play. And you can, write a goal to move them on to the next stage if they are in a stage that's age appropriate.
So this other framework talks more about how children go from sensory motor play. So that's like just exploring the environment, exploring sounds, exploring, this is like when they're dropping things off the high chair, to symbolic play, where they might, someone put in the chat, use the stick to be literally anything. And there's a progression for that to happen. And I use this framework a lot more when I'm assessing. There's more of a link here between language development and the way that kids are playing. If you look at how they're interacting more with objects and how they're using them within play. Can you go to the next slide?
Mm-hmm.
So sensory motor, this is, it says physical manipulation and inspection of objects. Then you'll see there's relational, that's non-functional. So they start to relate different objects together. It's still really exploring kind of how things look, how things work together. And then around age 10 or 12 months, you start to see more conventional play. So they'll start to use objects in the way that they're, were meant to be used. This happens through observation, and it's just kind of figuring things out. So they might start stacking blocks, pushing a toy car, kissing a teddy bear. And symbolic play, that's when they're playing in a way that is out of the context of where they are. So they might pretend to put mommy or daddy to sleep. This is where they may pretend that a block is food for their animal, right? So they're starting to use that symbolic representation of objects, but also time and place. So they can pretend they're somewhere else. You go to the next slide.
One thing I just want to note is that by the time that we're seeing children referred for a special education evaluation, these skills should already be in. So by 18 months, symbolic play should be developed. So when we're not seeing those, that's an area of concern.
Yeah, and there's also the instance where you might see a child who is much older, who is still in that stage of sensory motor play. So I have a third grader who is still doing a lot of, who is, very, very little language and is exploring the world in that very sensory focused way, and is really, still very excited about cause and effect toys. So that goes to show how, the language and the stage of play go hand in hand. And it's also something you can use as you're working with older kids who might not yet have symbolic play. And so then this is another way to categorize it. So this is also, what is the role of the child when they're playing? So, and what's the role of the object? So if they're the agent, means who's doing the action? Are they doing this to themselves, to a doll, or is this actually figurine play? Does the figurine have a voice? And you can do this when you're doing your play-based assessments, where you start to talk and see if the child will take their figurine and talk back to yours. And then how are they using the objects? Are they using a fork to be a fork, or are they using a stick to be a lightsaber? And there are also maybe instances of an imaginary object. So they might kind of just move their hand around, or mime something. So that's the third stage, where they're actually able to imagine something that's not there. And then the scheme is just how complex, how long is this play scheme. So it might just be, I'm brushing the baby's hair, or I'm, putting the baby to bed, or it might be that they play out the entire day for the baby. Go to the next slide. So here's
so go ahead, Lindsay.
So here's just another quote that you guys can read. And again, we're inviting you to just drop some reflections into the chat. It says, young children learn best through play. Assessment methods should match how they naturally express skills and needs.
So if you have thoughts on this, go ahead and drop them in the chat. or you can just digest it and think about it, agree, okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I think play is essential to assess, if not doing direct play-based assessment, but at least observing it, that's really important.
So why do we use play-based assessments? It sounds like a lot of you already are sold. We don't have to convince you too much, but in case you need a reminder or more reasons, it's a way to build rapport. So you want, the child can be very relaxed if they're like, oh, I'm here, I can play with this person. And you're more likely to see authentic, an authentic representation of how they are if they are relaxed. You're also going to get more interaction with the caregiver. So you're building that relationship, but you're also seeing how the child interacts with their caregiver. Some of our standardized tests are not culturally responsive. So a play-based assessment is more open-ended and it allows you more flexibility to provide tasks or interpret behavior in a culturally responsive way. As we all know, little ones just won't, it's not natural for them to sit at a table and look at pictures for half an hour. So it might not work. So it's offering an alternative to get the information that you need if you're not able to, get those standardized scores that you're after. And then it's holistic and naturalistic. So you're able to, you can go back. I'll listen to a language sample and first I'll listen for the social piece and then I'll listen again for articulation. So you're able to look at one snapshot. You can look at a 20-second video and you can get information about cognition, attention, information for your occupational therapist. I mean, you can get so much information in this setting. And then of course it's developmentally appropriate.
There was a comment in the chat. Oh, did you want to go ahead, Lindsay? You can finish.
No, go ahead.
There was a comment in the chat about only using play-based assessments, and that's not what we're saying. This is, of course, just one piece of a comprehensive assessment. And so you're going to do observations, you're going to do rating scales, you're going to do interview with parent or teacher. You can't just do a play-based assessment and say you're done. You would never just use one measure. So this is just one piece that you may not be able to do a standardized assessment. You're probably going to attempt it, but you might have to go back to your play-based, especially with preschool or 3-year-old. That might be the only thing you can get. So I always attempt standardized assessments, but if I can't get them, then I will use my play-based assessment data. So I just want to clarify.
Yes, and I like how this comment says, sometimes the only information we get from a subtest is that the child would rather do something else, and that's true. And I write that up, right? I say, how did the child respond to the presentation of the standardized test? So we're painting a picture of the child, right? So if you don't get your standardized test done, you're not fretting. You're saying, I'm adding this information to my picture of this child as a communicator or student or whatever it is your assessment is based on. Okay, we can go to the next slide.
There's a lot of research and literature supporting play-based assessments. So the National Association of Early Childhood says that it's a developmentally appropriate way to do assessment. There's been some studies that show that play-based observation is essential to capture skills missed by standardized tools. Dynamic play-based assessment reveals potential learning abilities beyond static scores. I find that play-based assessment is where I get most of my goal development ideas, more so than standardized scores. It's how you really get to know a child. Play provides a window to children's conceptual understanding, said Piaget, and play-based assessment helps assess communication in children who can't be tested by standardized tests and is critical for dual language learners, for example. And there's legal alignment to it. It provides rich qualitative data for IEP eligibility determination. It meets the IDA's requirement from multiple sources of information, and it is culturally responsive. You can make it culturally responsive. It can be trauma informed. If a child does have trauma, you can make it very safe and unstressful, and it can be a neurodivergent affirming practice. So like I said, there are different types of play-based assessments. There's observational, where you're using a rating scale or a checklist to observe a child in their naturalistic play to obtain assessment information. You can do this just by doing it, going into a classroom and observing. The DRDP is an example of this, or a narrative observation in a report would be an example of this. We're going to really talk about an interactive, non-standardized play-based assessment that we do, where you present the child with play opportunities and you see how they interact with you or their caregiver, and you put that information in a report. And then there's semi-standardized and standardized play-based assessments that are out there that you can use. So the first one that I just wanted to touch on briefly is observational play-based assessments. And that's when you go observe a child in their authentic, natural setting, which is absolutely important to do, of course, especially for this age range. You need to see them in their natural environment, on the playground, in their classroom. If you have been to any of my trainings, I like push this so hard. It's legally the most defensible thing to do, to go see them in their natural environment. You're going to get the best information from that. Ideally, you want to see them during a non-adult supported, true child-directed free play moment, so you can see what they are able to do on their own. You don't really want to see them during an ABA session. You want to see what they're able to do on their own. I did link a narrative observation example here if you want to see how one psychologist writes their narrative observation of a play scene happening at a preschool. Or this is another way to do this, is to use the DRDP, and you can, link some of the DRDP findings in your reports. Some semi-standardized or standardized play-based or partially play-based assessments that are common is the ADOS. I love the ADOS. I think it's a great tool. It does have some drawbacks, and I don't use it in every single assessment, but it is a play-based assessment that is standardized, semi-standardized, I would say, because, it is observational. You have to be very highly trained. I would say you have to practice. You should practice scoring with someone else. Lindsay and I often scored and would check our scores together, because it's really, there's a lot of variation in scores. And there is research that shows it can miss girls at times, because girls do show more imaginary play, which I'm going to talk about later. The preschool language scales, a speech and language assessment, does have a lot of play. Which is another measure that can work for speech and language, which is requires a multidisciplinary team. This is based off of milestones. That's how they do the scoring. It hasn't been updated since 2008, and I'm going to talk about how the milestones were updated in 2022. So it's a little bit outdated. It's also really complicated to score. If anyone does it, there's 3 huge manuals, and the scoring is quite complex. So we're going to talk now about just doing interactive informal play-based assessments. Here's an assessment room. And who can do these? Everyone. If you work in special ed and you're assessing children, anyone can do it for different reasons. School psychologists can do it to assess social communication when you're looking at autism eligibility, to look at play skills. You can do it for Larry P cases if a child's African American and you can't do standardized cognitive testing, or a multilingual student, and you want to look at play, and you want to look at developmental milestones, which I'm going to dive more into. Play-based assessments can be great. Early childhood special educators can assess in developmental areas for goal development, or to hone in on pre-academic areas using play. Speech pathologists, Lindsay's going to dive into this, can assess communication, obtain language samples, evaluate pragmatics, and for goal development. OTs and PTs can evaluate motor skills through play and to develop goals. And what does this actually look like? Well, it's not rocket science. You just, you put out toys, and we're going to talk about what toys, and you give the child a chance to initiate play with you or their caregiver, if the caregiver's in the room, and you engage them in play, and you observe their behavior, their language, their problem solving, social communication, milestone markers, and any signs of neurodivergent development. So getting started, you have to know, that's why we showed that video. You have to know neurotypical development and milestones to assess play. And that's the hard part, right? If you're new to this field, you might not know the milestones. If you haven't been around 3 or 4-year-olds, you might not feel confident knowing them. And so that's, I would say spend some time with 3 and 4-year-olds as much as you can. Get on the playground, go into TK. But I did link the CDC developmental milestones, which is if you've been to any of my trainings, I access this all the time, but this link is excellent. It links you to the full list of CDC milestones, which you can explore at your will. We're really going to kind of talk about this more. And then CalECSE has 2 tools that we've developed for play-based assessments, and they have been dropped in the chat. I'm just going to show them to you so you can reference them as we go through the rest of the training. One is an observational notes form, which looks specifically at neurotypical behaviors with the typical developmental milestones noted. These are behaviors when we're looking specifically at autism eligibility. On the front page are behaviors that are neurotypical that we want to see developing, like sustained eye contact, a range of facial expressions, showing objects, following a point. So these are things that would be positive to see if we wanted to rule out autism. And then on the back page are potential neurodiverse characteristics, things like repetitive use of toys, limited eye contact, limited nonverbal gesturing, limited response to name, limited ability to engage in pretend play. So these are potential developmental signs of autism. So that's just a way to track that when you're doing a play-based assessment. And then the next one is this is brand new. It's not on our website yet, but you have first access to it. It's a observed skills checklist for ages 2 to 5 during play-based assessment. And it's a compilation of the CDC's developmental milestones by age and ASHA's, the Association of Speech and Hearing Association's milestones. So it combines both by age in language and communication, cognitive, movement, and physical development. So you can check off what you're seeing a child is able to do, and then you can kind of get a range of where their skills are from ages 2 to 5. And you can use this as another way of looking at milestones. So those are 2 tools. Here are the speech and language milestones by ASHA. And then, for students with visual impairments or students who are deaf and hard of hearing. Oh, sorry, I'm not on the right tab. For students with visual impairments or students who are deaf or hard of hearing, play-based assessments should really be done with a specialist in these areas. So you're going to want to have a specialist knowledgeable about how those disabilities impact a child's development and play. So a teacher of deaf and hard of hearing students or a teacher of students with visual impairments should be doing play-based assessments with these children, because you want to know how their development is affected. There is the State Bill 2010 language milestones, ages 0 to 5, that were developed for the deaf and hard of hearing students, and they're available at this link. I'm going to click on this. So they have different milestones markers that you're going to want to know, and they're really important to know these that are specific to children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And they're listed here. So, some of them are similar, but some of them are different. Your baby makes onomatopoeia sounds such as choo choo, Swiss, and buzz at 7 to 12 months. By 12 months of age, your baby has 1 to 3 signs or words. So it's important for a child who is deaf or hard of hearing to look at these milestones versus the CDC milestones. Okay, I'm going to go back. And then when do other skills typically come in? So by 9 months, a child should be responding to their name, showing a range of facial expression, smiling or laughing during games like peekaboo, and showing joint attention. And you saw in that first video that those little babies were doing these things really fluidly and frequently, right? So there was frequent sharing of social smiles, like looking at people and smiling, laughter, doing a range of facial expressions. And one thing I really want to mark in that video was that joint attention, where a person or a child looks at something, looks back at the caregiver or a person or a child in the room and looks back at something. That's what joint attention is. was in very early. So you see it in babies, and it happens a lot. So that's something that I'm really looking for when I'm looking at autism is I'm looking for a lack of that or a limited amount of that, not a full lack. It doesn't have to be a full lack, but a limited amount. And then by 15 months, a child should be copying the actions of other children, showing items to you. So if you recall that first video, there was lots of showing of items to other children or passing items to other children. And there was lots of pointing to ask about items or just showing items. So those gestures should be happening a lot. And that comes in very early, before even a year and a half. And then by 18 months, there should be pointing to show interest to other items, like, Mom, look at the airplane, or babysitter, look at this doggy over here. And there should be copying. So like, if babysitter is talking on the cell phone, you saw like the little babies talking on the phone, all that stuff should be coming in by a year and a half. So when we're seeing 3-year-olds not doing that, that is a marker that something's going on. So these are the CDC and ASHA milestones put together. So by age 2, so at age 2, not like at the end of age 2, this is what a 2-year-old should be able to do. They should be moving into parallel play. So they should be have an interest in playing next to peers. They should notice when mom's upset, like crying or peers crying. They should be speaking in 2 words. Now, there's videos linked here. We're not going to show them all. But they should start to be doing gestures, nonverbal gestures like blowing kisses. They should be cognitively, they should be able to hold on to something with one hand and taking like a lid off a container. You can check out the videos on your own time, just because we don't have a ton of time to get through all the videos. And then by age 3, so right at age 3, they should be joining other peers in place. They should be starting to do associative play. I'm going to show the video of associative play so you see what it looks like.
Whoa, nice it.
So you see they're kind of looking at one another. They're looking at one another. They're playing in the same area. They're starting to kind of interact in their play. And then I'm going to show this video of a 3-year-old having a back and forth exchange in conversation. So you can kind of see what a just 3-year-old looks like in conversation.
Yeah.
Uncle Ray. Can you say thank you, Ray?
Thank you, Ray.
How is it?
Good.
I'm so glad you like it.
I said thank you, Ray.
You said thank you, Ray. That's so nice. What are you having?
I haven't a pie.
That video is so cute. Now, the thing that I really want to emphasize from that video is like the eye contact was solid. Am I not sharing my screen anymore? I feel like I lost my share. Let me go back to that. The eye contact was solid. It was sustained, and there was back and forth. Like that kid was just 3 and he was hanging on to a conversation. So that's really important to think about when you are assessing a 3 or 4-year-old who maybe doesn't have that kind of like back and forth conversation. All right, Lindsay, it's you.
All right. So by age 4, looking at social, emotional, and play skills, kids are now typically going to be pretending to be something else. They'll start talking about the kids at school, right? So they may come home if they're in TK and that's when they may start asking for play dates. They're asking about kids who are not there. They start to comfort others, and they like to be a helper. And that's when you're going to see the solid cooperative play begin to come in. For language, these are just very broad language milestones, but so you know what to look for. Just if you're doing a play-based assessment, you'll see kids saying 4 or more words. They'll talk about at least one thing that happened during the day, and they can answer some simple questions. There's so many types of questions, but the one they use here is like, what is something for? So an object related to an action. And 4-year-olds are usually pretty intelligible. You can understand most of what they're saying. go to the next slide, or do you want to share one of these videos?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, age 5, you're going to see more cooperative play, get more complex. You're going to see them playing turn-taking games. They may even start to play some simple board games or card games. They'll sing, act, or dance for you. In language, for language, this is where you're going to start to be able to have a sustained conversation, 3 or more back and forth. And then cognitive skills, you'll see a lot more of the pre-academic skills coming in, so they can name some letters and numbers, they can count to 10, and start to use some time concepts like yesterday, tomorrow, morning, or night. They are probably not using yesterday accurately at this point. Oftentimes they'll say yesterday to mean like anything that happened before right now. Next slide. So we're going to talk about what to look for, and we're going to be doing that a little bit. We're going to look at a few videos here. Are you going to show the first one first?
I think so I'm going to show a portion of this joint attention video. I just really want to emphasize, because I've seen joint attention just be misinterpreted for a child looking at the same thing you're looking at. And that's not what it is. It really needs to be that it has to have that social referencing piece where the child also shares the enjoyment with you. So they look back at you. So I'm going to just show a very quick little clip of this video so that it's explained.
Your child will look at the object of interest and then back at you to learn and share enjoyment. An example is when your child looks up to the sky and points to an airplane, and then looks back at you and back to the airplane passing by. If your child
Okay, that was really fast, but I wanted to emphasize how important it is to make that distinction between joint attention being looking at the same toy that you're looking at, but never actually looking at you, because that's not joint attention. That's not shared enjoyment. That's not social referencing. That's just happened to be really interested in that object, and that you're showing them because maybe it's a really cool object. And we're going to see some of that. And Lindsay and I made a video of her doing a play-based assessment later, but that's an important distinction that you need to see. And then this video is really wonderful. It is of 2 twins. And I'm going to show this one now. Let me make sure the captions are on. Okay. The first child is neurotypical. And this play is pretty neurotypical. Neat. Look at that beautiful joint.
Yeah, it fell off. That's right. Here it is. Uh-oh.
Okay. And then the twin has autism.
Push. Good boy.
You'll see he's very
Ready,
object
set.
focused.
Go.
He's not giving her any joint attention.
Ethan, push.
No social referencing. I'm just having to work really hard to engage her.
Go. Stop.
Very interested in the train.
Ethan. Go. Here it is. Take the train. Stay up here, please. Push.
I feel like that video.
Ready, set, push.
Okay, let me pause that. I feel like that video summarizes in like 1 minute the difference between, when I'm assessing a child who may not qualify and then a child who may qualify. If I had to sum it up in 1 minute, it really sums up like a lot of kind of the differences, because that when you're working hard in a play-based assessment and that there's no joint attention and it's more object-oriented versus people-oriented and there's no social engagement, like the video really sums up so many things. So, Lindsay, you can go through this slide, and then we're going to show a video of a play-based assessment that Lindsay did with a student.
I think also in that video, just another thing I always look for is how a child protests, right? So the first child wanted to do that activity. He was into it. The second child was, he was watching the train or car roll briefly, and then he kind of was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So he tried to leave instead of, using some way to communicate, like not shaking his head no, or saying, no, I'm done, right? So that's another thing we look at is, and I think that might even be on this list, is how does a child protest. Maybe it's not on this list, but that is something that I would always look for. You look at what toys they gravitate to. Carrie already talks about like the showing. Showing something usually means you're thinking about what the other person is thinking about or looking at. So usually with showing, you'll see them look at the object and then look at you to see if, or their caregiver. That's a good reason to have the caregiver in the room, is they're more likely to show something to their parent than to you. How does the child try to involve you in their play? Joint attention we'll talk a lot about, and responding to their name. How do they share enjoyment? They might show it in different way. They might smile, or they might do it through laughing or talking, and they might look at you and they might not. How do they play with toys? Do they incorporate your ideas? So I'll always start when we have a little bit of a like a routine of how you can do a play-based assessment, but I start by watching and see what they do on their own, and then I'll enter later. And kind of one of the last things I'll do is I'll start to incorporate or introduce my own ideas and see if they use them and build upon them, like in cooperative play. Or are they going to imitate you? So maybe they don't have their own ideas yet, their own creative ideas yet, but they might be in that stage where they're starting to think about it. And so they might see what you do and then imitate you. Do they point to show things? How do they request more of something? So I know a lot of my students who are autistic or just have very limited skills or problem solving skills. They might have just different ways to request more of something. I just was doing rocket balloons with a student half an hour ago, and instead of handing me the balloon to pump it again, he put it in his mouth and tried to blow it up, and walked away from me while I tried to show him how to do it. What about very social back and forth games like peekaboo, or rolling a ball back and forth, or a pullback car back and forth? And then I love seeing how they problem solve, or if they need help, what do? Do they ask for help? Do they say what they want you to do, or do they just say help? Or do they make a groaning or a whining sound? Do they kind of just sit there? There's so many things that kids will do when they're coming up against a small or big problem. And that gives you a lot of information about how they're going to look in a classroom.
So we have a video of a play-based assessment that Lindsay did with a student. The parent was so generous in letting us film the student. And we want you to really watch it. We're going to pause it several times, and we want you to drop in the chat what you noticed now that we've kind of shown you some samples of things you should be looking for.
My disclaimer is I'm trying really hard not to do therapy with this student because he's my student. So that's just my one little caveat.
There's animal toys. Yay!
I like those.
Which ones? Spirit.
A parrot.
And an advocate. And a zebra. Oh no. Look.
Oh, and
A lion.
yeah.
And a camel.
And look what I have.
What I have. A zebra.
And look what I have here.
Hippopotamus.
Here.
And a zebra.
Oh, that's a little zebra.
And that's a big zebra. And what that animal?
That's a swan.
A swan.
Yeah. It goes in the water like this.
And a cheetah. And
Okay, if anybody wants to come off mute or drop something in the chat, some things you noticed that you might note in your report or things that you saw. Anybody?
I noticed a lot of just object focus, lack of eye contact, but really not responding to your prompts of like your idea of what that animal does. It's just really focused on what he wanted to do, which is labeling and staging the animals.
Very good. Thank you, everybody. Good. Okay, we'll keep going. I saw lots of comments. Yes.
Can I
go ahead.
point a couple things out from that line? Because I mean, I think it's just really interesting because it looks, I think if you're looking at it at a first glance, it looks very interactive because he's talking, I'm talking. One thing that's, I think, interesting is when I say, look what I have, and he says, look what I have. So he's imitating what I'm saying rather than looking what I have at what I have. But then when I tried harder, right? So this is kind of where it's not that like all or nothing. So when I put my face a little bit closer to him and I show it a little bit closer to him, then he looked, right? And so you see the difference. And I think it's just important to note that it's not like he responds or he doesn't respond, right? It depends on the context a little bit.
Okay, we're going to keep going. Lots of good observations. Should I make it bigger?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. Where should I point it?
There.
There? Okay, up high.
Yes.
Oh! Oh no!
No. The animals eat.
Animals eat? What are they going to eat? They're hungry.
Trees.
They're going to eat trees.
Yes.
Do they need to go to the store?
No.
No.
I go to forest.
They're going to the forest. Good idea. Oh, let's go to the forest.
Yes.
Okay, let's go. Follow me.
Two ways.
It's okay if the trees fall down. Okay. So does anyone want to come off mute and say what you noticed, or you can put it in the chat? Lining up of objects, went straight to the animals and no interest in continuing the play with the balloon. Yeah, and there was no shared enjoyment. Usually that balloon gets kids. Usually we get like the joint, the social smile or some request for more.
What I like about doing the balloon is I love asking like aware questions. So he does point to me, but does he check to see that I saw his point? He doesn't. He did a good one. He did. He enjoyed it. He just cared more about the forest.
He enjoyed it, but he didn't direct his like smile to Lindsay. There was no shared enjoyment with Lindsay. There was no, are you enjoying this too, Lindsay? No, there was none of that. Okay, we're going to watch one more clip of this. Or maybe we should, actually, I think we're going to skip it because we're a little bit short on time. But I did put it in the chat. So here are some developmental, Lindsay, actually, this is you still. Go ahead. Sorry, you can't see what I'm sharing.
Yeah. So we can use play-based assessments for any young child. We're focusing a lot on autism, you'll notice, just because that's where you're going to see a lot of the differences in how children play, how they demonstrate joint attention, and how they engage with you. So these are some of the things that we are looking at different ages that might tell us that a child has autism. So by 6 months, we're going to see the limited social smiles with caregivers. So this is what we would see if the child were typically developing by a certain age. And if we don't, we might think that they have autism. So 9 months, there's going to be limited to and fro sharing of smiles or sounds. 12 months, limited or no babbling, limited or no gestures. By 16 months, you're looking at how much language output they have. So few or no words by 16 months. And then again, looking at language by 2 years old. So few or no meaningful 2-word phrases. And then we do have this article about autistic play being authentic and meaningful that you guys can take a look at. But I just pulled out some quotes from the beginning. It says that play is the spontaneous activity of children. And a child's play is individualized based on their interests and sensory preferences. So that means that autistic children may play differently than their neurotypical peers. So we're not necessarily trying to make them play like neurotypical peers, because play is what children do naturally, and that's how they explore and learn.
Of course, not, a child with autism may have one or two of these developmental signs and he doesn't need to have every single one of these, just making that caveat. This is a great video to watch if you haven't seen it. It's from the Kennedy Krieger Institute. It's showing different play-based assessments with children who do have autism and then some children who don't. And so it's just another way to hone your skills. There also is some research on how boys play looks different from girls play in early childhood. And so boys tend to present with the more stereotypical autistic play of lining up toys, showing interest in parts of object like spinning wheels, repetitive motor movements like hand flapping, pacing, and engaging in more solitary play. And they're less likely to show pretend. Where research shows that girls play may look more socially acceptable. Like they may have big collections of stuffies or My Little Ponies, and they may organize them versus line them up. They may have repetitive movements that look more socially appropriate, like twirling. They have higher nonverbal communication, like more frequent eye contact and better conversational skills. So they can talk, about things like their dogs or their My Little Ponies or school. And they can just appear bossy and like have a hard time sharing, but in general be more social. And they have more pretend play, which is why the ADOS may not be as able to pick them up. And girls, especially in early childhood, may be identified more as shy or suffering from anxiety. When you want to make your play kit, really you just need a pretty simple, this is my actual play kit, this picture, and it's pretty simple. So, cause and effect toy, some pretend play things like a phone and baby doll, some bubbles or a jack-in-the-box, something you can try for joint attention with. I use a blanket for peekaboo, a wordless book, and some sort of sensory toy like Play-Doh, or that there's like a little bubble thing here that's kids like to look at, and some like blocks. Here's some other ideas for preschool play kits. Here's Lindsay's room set up for play. There's a chair for the caregiver. I'm just going kind of fast because we're going to run out of time, but this is a link to a possible play sequence where you can follow along, where you do free play, you join in the free play, you try some pretend play, press for joint attention. I like to look at a book together and then play a little interactive game and put out some sensory materials. And then let me go back to this tab. Okay, Lindsay.
So I just always try to remind myself that the point of this is to get an idea of how the child, for me, is as a communicator. So you just want to make sure you don't have to work too hard. I'm doing it a little bit in the video there, but I wanted to see what he does with incremental steps. But you don't have to work too hard. Just observe and what you see. And the biggest thing, this is the hardest thing to do, especially when you have parents in the room. They really have a hard time with this. So I always send an email ahead of time to parents and let them know what I'll be doing, and that I really want to observe and see the child without any of their intervention unless I ask them. But you really want to have a lot of wait time. When you're quiet and you see what they do without asking a lot of questions or putting a lot of demands on them, that's when you get the good stuff. We can kind of skip this part, but just in general, this is where a speech therapist, you're going to get your language sample. And so it's important I always just like to have toys out that aren't necessarily really object focused, because I want them to talk. So I'm going to not put the cause and effect toys in there. I'm going to put things where, like a wind up toy where they need a little bit of help with it, or a wordless book. And the other thing is that oftentimes speech therapists, we have to be really good at these because we're often the people who will assess kids first because they're not speaking, but we need to be looking at all of these other milestones at the same time in case it's appropriate to refer for a bigger assessment. So what are we looking for in those language samples? What can we learn? We can learn a lot about the child's how they use language. What are the purposes? Is it for requesting, protesting? A child is gonna walk into my office in 1 minute, by the way. How they use language to problem solve, how they use gestures, how intelligible their language is. You can also learn about their receptive language. How do they respond to the questions you ask or the directions that you give? You can learn about their social responsiveness. So when you make a comment, do they make a comment back? And you can, of course, learn about their language mechanics and whether or not their language is indicating that they're learning in a Gestalt language manner.
All right, Lindsay, I'll wrap us up.
Okay.
I'm gonna, you guys could read this slide about taking language samples, but basically Lindsay covered it. You want to put out choice that will elicit language, right? So not something that a child's just gonna play with repetitively over and over. And then we've linked different ways of collecting the data. So you can take notes, you can record the session with parent permission, that we have our 2 tools from CalECSE, or you can use the developmental checklist from CDC's. There's also another couple little cool checklists from ASHA or from a website, Informed SLP Stages of Play Assessment sheet I've linked here. Finally, we've linked a couple write-ups for reports. Feel free to explore these at your leisure. There's a report sample write-up of the play-based assessment observation notes form. You can look at that. And then there's the chart. There's a blank chart of how I have integrated that form into my reports. There's some speech and language write-ups of place-based assessments. And then I've linked, again, that narrative observation report. So we are done with this presentation. I'm sorry we came right to the end. Thank you for being here today. If you want to stay on for a few minutes for questions, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes to answer questions if anyone has any. But thank you so much. Hang in there for this last month, and I appreciate you being here for this presentation. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. And I will look in the chat and see if there's any questions. Yes, or if anyone wants to ask any.
I actually raised my hand.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I do have, I'm actually not a preschool teacher anymore. I'm the program director, but we do have a child that does not show any autism or any kind of a behavior. It's just the language. He will be 3 on Monday and he's still like, I mean, he has his own language, but I refer him and they just don't want to do the referral. And I'm concerned because he clearly needs speech support and assessment. But he just, like I said, he's almost 3 and he just bubbles and you can hear little things, but it's like having his own language. So what do I do as a program director or preschool teacher?
Sounds like he would qualify for speech to me.
If he's 3 and you're not able to make out any words, he definitely sounds like a good candidate for an assessment.
For speech.
Mm-hmm. So what have you tried?
I have tried. Sorry, I tried the regional center and I also tried SELPA, and they just said, oh, he's too young. And I said, are you kidding me? So I think maybe they need to hear the push with from the parent, but the parent's like, well, the doctor say it's fine, and they're not following up. So I just need some more advice.
Yeah, well, when he's 3, he can go to the school district
Well, now, yeah, on Monday.
Yeah, I would recommend he does that the family does that.
So he's not able to get any support from the regional center anymore, huh?
Not unless he has a developmental disability after age 3.
Okay.
But his medical, he can go through his medical insurance for an eval.
I don't think they have any medical insurance. I mean, they do have the, yeah, Medical or Medicare, whatever it is.
I also experienced a family, and the child was almost 5, who the pediatrician was saying the same thing, that, oh, it's fine, and he still had unintelligible speech. And again, like you're saying, family had Medi-Cal versus private insurance. And mom kept saying, I think something's wrong. And I said, yeah, I agree. You have cause for concern. So, unfortunately, the pediatricians are not, in certain circumstances, I'm not sure why they aren't more supportive. I recommended a lot of families check in with the Mind Institute as well. So,
which one?
the UC Davis Mind Institute.
I mean, if a child's not speaking at 5, that's very alarming. So, I mean,
He was speaking, but it was unintelligible.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
So by 4, a child should be fully intelligible. So, and at 3, they should be speaking pretty clearly, not totally intelligible, but fairly clearly. So I would definitely refer to the school district in both those cases.
One quick question. When you're doing play-based assessment, so we do a lot of things that you talked about. It's just kind of blended with our direct standardized assessment. So is that okay? Or are you recommending like a full assessment that is just play-based, like an assessment session?
I do them together. I usually start with play, so I'd get some rapport.
Right.
So I'll do like a half an hour of play-based, and then I try the standardized. So, but you can do the reverse, I don't think you need to schedule a separate session, or there's no need.
We do 3 different assessments, like an hour-long assessments with just multidisciplinary assessments. So my speech path is usually with me, and we'll start off with a lot of the functional play, the pop-up toys and things like that. And in between our sessions or between our assessments, we kind of do a lot of the symbolic play and all the other kind of plays. But I just wanted to make sure I wasn't like, that's okay. Like I said, we do a lot of things that you guys are talking about. So that feels good that we're on the right path. But I wanted to make sure that it's you guys aren't recommending like just a one play-based assessment.
No, I think as long as your child is not like distraught from your standardized assessment, which sometimes can happen, and you feel like you've got some good rapport, then I think the play-based assessment is valid. Unless you have a child who's like throwing the protocol at you because they're mad that you tried to do a standardized, then I think your play-based assessment's fine. I typically do it on the same session.
We'll bring out different toys at different times. And we usually start with functional play, like pop-up toys and things like that, because that really seems to calm them down and becomes more comfortable with us. And then we'll go to more of the symbolic and pretend play stuff. So, but thank you. This was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I think we're going to close the meeting down. Oh, let's see. There's a question about just wondering if Tony Linder, I don't know, she had to have major surgery, so I don't know if she will be coming back in October. I'm not sure how her health is. Sorry, someone asked if Tony Linder is going to be presenting in October at the symposium, and I don't know. I was actually just thinking about her. There are not resources or tips available for neurodiverse play developmental norms or expectations yet, because I think it's so diverse. I think it's such a diverse display of, I've worked with so many children who are neurodiverse, and I would say the play always looks different in my experience, I haven't seen the same play necessarily. So no, I can't say that there's tips or norms. I do like that article we linked, though. I think it's good. And there is, I don't have this to link, but if you look up Psychology Today, I just read an article about autistic like imagination, and how some adults who are autistic are reporting that when they were like lining up toys as children, they were actually in this rich inner world. It's really fascinating. So Google Psychology Today, autistic inner worlds, and it's really interesting. Okay, should we close down the meeting? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.